Hey, Rockland, well, welcome. We've got a special treat for you here today. I've got Sean Taylor here with me. He is from Cornerstone Christian Counseling, and he's going to answer some of the questions that have come my way over this last week or last few days, something like that. So let me introduce Sean to you. And Sean, if you can just share a little bit about your family and then your counseling practice and your history.
Yeah. Well, good to be here. Yeah, thanks for having me. Yeah, so married. Angie's my wife. We've been married for 15 years. I better get that right.
Yeah.
And we have two kids, Elijah and Eva. Elijah's 12 and Eva's 10. And we started Cornerstone about 10 years ago. I guess actually in 2009, and a little over 10, I guess. And yeah, we started it because we just felt like there was a need to have gifted and trained counselors that love Jesus and are gifted and trained to help people practically get from where they're at to where God wants them to be. Like Jesus said, I came that they may have life and have it to the full. And yet we have these things in our lives that keep us from experiencing that. And we don't know what to do with them. So we're trying to bring the best of what research has and leave the rest, and use that as a tool upon the solid foundation of Scripture and a biblical worldview. And say, well, how do you live this out? We're going to help you to live this out. Give you a tangible place to come, to work through marital struggles, to work through family struggles, improve your parenting, a place to bring your kids as well, for them to work through their stuff. And you as an individual as well.
And can you talk about the intake process, about sort of how Christian it is and you kind of adapt to people's comfort level?
Yeah, good question. So we have, basically when people come in, most of the time people are coming in because we are overtly Christ-centered. Cornerstone Christian Counseling, it's right in the center of our name. Yet there are varying degrees of comfort when people are seeking that. Actually, sometimes people aren't believers at all. So with everyone that comes in, we ask them, do you wish to have discussion of God and biblical principles, use of Scripture, use of prayer during your time in counseling? And they can say no. They can say yes. They could say no to one thing and yes to another, And so we meet people where they're at. It doesn't change who we are. We're Christ-centered people. We believe that Christ is at the center of healing, but we want to honor where other people are at. So sometimes we're just not going to be as explicit about that. We're not going to use prayer overtly. We'll be praying internally, just because we can't stop who we are and who God is, but we will honor people with where they're at as well. So we have non-believers that come in because they said, hey, my friend, she had a great experience with you. I'm not a Christian. Do you see non-Christians? And we're just like, yeah, and come on in. And we will love them where they're at, however they are.
Well, that's good to know for people in our congregation or looking for counseling, or somebody else, that if maybe one's a Christian and one's not, that they can go, it's not going to get shoved down your throat. They are Christian, and it's going to be coming from that perspective.
Yeah.
And so during COVID now, can you talk about just how you're operating, but also just some of the things that you're starting to see? Because you said you're about as busy as ever.
We are, yeah. Basically, COVID is amplifying everything. It's making it bigger. So if you had marital conflict, you really have marital conflict. If you struggle with depression or anxiety, it's really coming out now. There is an energy, an intensity that surrounds us, from the news to the grocery store to driving. It just feels like people are on edge, and they can be, at least. And so it is bringing things to the surface that probably were always there, but it's kind of like when you have magma below the surface, the thing that causes eruption oftentimes isn't the fact that there was magma. There's always magma there, but when you have an unsteady surface allows things to come on up to the surface, which makes for more stress and anxiety, but it's also an opportunity to work through these things. And I think that that's God's intention when He allows us to go through difficulty, is actually to bring things to the surface so that we can actually heal and grow, so that we can be free from it and move forward from it as well.
And then you're doing Zoom, you're doing in-person, you're doing all sorts of stuff there. So that's good. It's a lot of different options. So let's get right to some practical stuff. So you've been doing this for a while now, and some questions that came from our congregation is, can you just go over maybe a quick snapshot of what are some of the biggest issues that you see in marriages that tend to cause the most strain? And maybe if it's, if you see this tends to come more from the wife and this tends to more come from the husband, or there may be some that are both.
Yep. A lot of times people call in and say, we're having communication issues. Oftentimes it's categorized as that. Oftentimes what they have a hard time communicating about are very personal things like hopes and desires. It can be that are not being met. Sexual connection, they argue about sex or they just avoid it. And because that's a level of intimacy that at that point in time is just off the table, and it is a result of something, but it also leads to other things, a lot of tension. Different ways of handling emotions. One person likes to check out, watch the game. Usually the guy, he's like, I just want to check out. Give me a break. I'm going to go for a ride, go on a trip, whatever. Can we just get away? And she wants to sit down and talk about it. So male and female differences really come into play because wives want a spouse that they can talk to, and that he'll understand, he'll be present for them. And men generally want to have a spouse that will go on adventures with them, or they can, or they don't have to talk. They can just sit and enjoy something. Why do we have to talk all the time? A lot of guys will say, or that sexual relationship. Oh, what's going on there? Like, don't you love me? And there's different things going on between men and females, or men and women, but it's just another level of connection that ends up not being the blessing that God created it to be, but it's a source of tension, unfortunately. Right. So it's an outworking of things, but it's also a cause of tension.
Okay.
As well.
So what kind of counsel do you give people? Because if, like, the way you just described it is, in communication, men and women tend to do it very differently. I always hear men are more shoulder to shoulder, women are face to face kind of thing. So you've got some people there in your office, and he clearly is the shoulder to shoulder, she's the face to face. Yeah. How do you kind of counsel them through that? Yes. So
basically, the counselor ends up being oftentimes a translator because they're speaking little different languages. There's stuff going on within them, but they're not communicating that across the cultural divide. And I will say, we're talking about in stereotypical language, where men are shoulder to shoulder and women are face to face, and that's oftentimes the case, but sometimes it's not, and it's good to be aware of that. Right. When it comes down to it, it's teaching them to slow down and actually be able to talk through whatever's going on within them without hurting the other person or overwhelming them, or without themselves being overwhelmed. And so we sometimes it's about coaching them, slowing them down, so that they're actually feeling what's going on inside. It's about regulating. Sometimes I'm a referee, and I'm like, okay, we'll just take a time out right now. Let's just breathe, and sometimes we'll pray in the middle of session. Sometimes we'll just take a breath in the middle of session, just to slow it down. So that's one of the main things that we end up doing in couples counseling, is actually slowing it down and creating a safe space for them to have a meaningful conversation. Then, once they are able to talk through these things, we can get to more of the origins of them. We figure out what are their raw spots, as in what are their areas of sensitivity. If we can slow them down so that they can start identifying where are the points that they start talking about and it derails the conversation. Okay, let's focus in on those points, and then we'll be able to, if we can understand the origins of those raw spots a little bit more, maybe we can have a healthier conversation. If like typical conversation might be, it's all really critical and you're doing this and you never do that. What we tried to do is slow down the criticism. Oftentimes the response to that is stonewalling. Oh my gosh, I'm done. And you just say, what do you need to hear from me to end this conversation? Or you just shut up, or you become like very cold, or whatever it is. Usually somebody is a pursuer and somebody is a withdrawer. And that's oftentimes the dynamic that happens. And so we, again, slow that down so that the withdrawer is not so overwhelmed and the pursuer is not so overwhelming.
Gotcha.
So if we can
sense.
slow down that dynamic and allow them to actually listen before they speak, we can get somewhere with that.
That makes sense. We've always heard the turtle in the hailstorm. I don't know if that's a common one, where the turtle doesn't want to talk, and so the hailstorm starts hitting on him, and then so he tucks in his shell, and the hailstorm goes harder, and then he just tucks up, and it just kind of pulls back.
Oh, I love it. Yeah,
so my wife and I basically fit the stereotype, I guess, for lack of a better term, where she'll want to talk. I'll go. I'd rather just sort of process this thing on my own. And one of the things that comes up in conversations, and sorry, I didn't prep him with all the questions ahead of time, is if I operate this way of I'd rather be more efficient. I'd like to sort of figure things out on my own, and then I'll just give me some space, sort of thing. And then she's like, I'd like to talk about it. Yeah. It sounds like the tendency or the recommendation is to err on the side of going more with this style, if I'm hearing that.
With slowing down.
With slowing down, and more like in other words, it sounds like it's more of a leap for this person, whoever that is, to say your bent is this. Probably in this instance, it's better to defer to how she's doing it. Is that accurate?
Kind of.
Okay.
It's actually slowing down the back and forth exchange.
Okay.
But it is engaging more.
Okay.
It's slowing down the emotions so that you can actually engage more. So.
Gotcha.
So Angie and I, my wife and I, were opposite of you guys. And so what I had to learn to do was actually slow down my emotional intensity. Okay. But still engage with her and not pull away as well. So it's kind of a both and thing. Okay. But just like you identified, you and Nikki, is your wife's name, right? Nikki, yeah. You and Nikki actually have this dynamic, and how do we make that work? So you recognize I'm a pursuer, or she's a pursuer, I'm a withdrawer. So I want to slow down, but she wants me to engage more. So we need to have a conversation about what works for the two of us. Angie and I have had to have the same conversation as well. So it's not a one size fits all, maybe is a way that I'm responding here. Slowing down is a general dynamic, and engaging more is a general dynamic that helps more. But what if you're also a pursuer? Or you're withdrawer. Then you have to change. You have to first identify how do we engage with each other, and what do we need in order to actually work through a conversation in order to have a satisfying conclusion.
That makes sense. So we have some people in our congregation been married for a long time, and one of the categories of questions that came up was, you've got two people there, one of them is willing to change, one of them is not. And especially one of the things that came up was, this has been a pattern in our marriage for, I don't know how long it takes before it sort of sets in, but 10 years or 20 years, or as long as we've been married, 30 or 40 years.
Right.
What would you say to that person who's going, can we actually have change, and what can we do to make that happen?
Yeah. So there's a reason why somebody doesn't want to make a change. So oftentimes, the person that wants to instigate change, they say, I want this to be different. I want this to be different. And the other person is holding their ground somehow, for some reason, I should say. And so kind of like the dynamic we just talked about, how can this person actually slow down and ask the question, why don't you want to change? What's keeping you from changing? What's behind that? So instead of pointing the finger and saying, you don't want to change at all, you're not doing anything in this marriage, which can be quite overwhelming. And of course, they're going to say, yeah, whatever. They might just shut down. And it's because you're so this and that, But if they said that, they would get their head bit off a little bit more, So again, what we're trying to do is slow down and understand what is behind the behavior. What's behind what they're doing. And we can only do that if we're a safe place for the other person.
Right, and it sounds like that's also one of the nice benefits of having a counselor, or frankly what I do too, of having somebody else, another Christian friend that can ask the question, and it doesn't come from the source of the person that you're against, for lack of a better term.
Having a neutral third party who creates a safe space. Sometimes we just all need that. Because sometimes we have a hard time being that for our spouse.
Right.
So how can we actually help or receive the help from somebody else in order to create that space so we can have the dialogue that needs to happen.
So kind of building on that too, one of the big areas that came up was, what if there's a difference of opinion on certain issues where there's not really much of a middle ground, or if there is a middle ground, like I think finances should be like this, Nikki thinks they should be like this. We could split the difference and then we both sort of lose. But there's some things like, do you want to find out the gender of the baby before they're born? You can't like
it's an either or decision.
Right, exactly.
There's no compromise.
Exactly. How do you walk through those?
So usually, at least what I do with couples is I create. Basically, it's like a bullseye. And what are the areas of compromise in this decision? And what's meaningful about this decision? You know, so if we're making a financial decision where it's either we buy this house or we buy that house or we don't buy anything at all, what is most important for you? Why are you so passionate behind your stance as well? And that's, again, what we're trying to do is get to the emotions, the motivations for the intensity. So if you can get behind that, like, okay, so I want it this way and you want it this way, and there's really no compromise here, you can ask, what is behind your choice or your decision on this, your desire? Why is it so important for you? And I encourage people to try to go 5 questions deep, as in ask, why is it so important for you? And then they start talking, and then you say, well, tell me a little bit more about this. Tell me, and ask another question. Try to go 5 questions deep. And it's kind of a way, like in James. In James, he says, be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to anger, right? That's really hard to do.
Right.
Over things that are, that we find to be really personal and we have convictions about. We just want to tell the other person why they're wrong and why we're right, or we want to just argue our point. What if we actually said, tell me a little bit more about your point. Why does this matter so much to you? And then if you can actually have 5 questions answered, then maybe the compromise is something where you say, okay, well, I see that at the core of it, this is so meaningful for you because of these points. I'm wondering if we can actually honor those points and then honor the points I talked about. And find another option, you know, or what's another way we can honor the core of your heart, you know, the core of your desires.
Yeah, I wonder how many times we've already framed the question as option A or option B, and there might be an option C.
Or Z or Y.
Right.
You know, there could be a myriad of options that we're not considering. But humans, we have a tendency to just say, it's either this or that. There's 2 kinds of people in this world. We love saying things like that, right? The fact of the matter is there's billions of kind of people in this world. And a lot of people have nuanced views and desires, but we like to simplify things down into categories.
So you see a lot of people that have deep hurts more than, she was rude to me this morning, but like my marriage is a source of pain and has been for decades or whatever.
Right.
You see some of that. So, and also as a believer, I think this is why I really want to ask you this. How do you work through forgiveness? How can you forgive somebody? And I'm also thinking, or what came up is with or without an apology. If they never apologize, if they don't receive your forgiveness, you're sort of giving it to nobody. How do you work through that hurt and that forgiveness?
So forgiveness is difficult because it's not just a head decision. It's one thing to say, I forgive you, and to even say, I'm forgiving you. It's a process as well. It's another thing to work through our emotional reactivity as well. As in, we have physiologically, we have reactions to those things that caused us pain. Okay? So if we got in a car accident and say we got in a car accident at a particular intersection, for a lot of people, if they go through that intersection again, they're going to have a physiological response. They can say in their head, it's safe. I can recognize that it's safe, that is in the past, and I can move on in my head, but your body will have an intense reaction sometimes. sometimes we actually have to go through extra steps to work through our physiological reaction. So especially if it's with another human. If another human hurt us, we can say, I forgive you, but in order for me to actually feel comfortable with you, I have to go through some other things. And that's another level of forgiveness. There are some things that we can do on our own. Sometimes it's good to write out things. Why am I still upset with this person? What makes me feel unsafe with this person? Sometimes it's implementing healthy boundaries, saying, I forgive this person and I don't want to be hurt by this person again, and I feel like they're still dangerous in this particular way. So I can forgive, but I can also be wise with my heart. Guard your heart, for it's the wellspring of life. There's something with that. And so make sure that you can engage, but you gauge wisely as well. And then also know that trauma is stored in the body. And so if you have a traumatic experience with somebody, you might need some help to work through that. One of the things that we do in trauma therapy is actually process the trauma out of the body so that people don't have the same physiological reactions that they have to another human or another situation. So there's different layers and different ways of addressing those different layers.
That's interesting. It's when it comes to forgiveness, I think I'm the type that likes to go, how do I do it? I want to do it now,
Yes.
and almost truncate what really may need to be a process in order for it to be healthy.
And it's a great point. And we can pride ourselves in saying, well, I've forgiven, I forget and forgotten and all that. And that can be the case. And that could be a huge blessing.
Right.
Maybe God gives you with the gift of freedom from it. And sometimes God doesn't give that, and he wants you to work through the process. Because in actually working through the process, you are actually living out forgiveness rather than just an easy decision. It can be a process. Sometimes that process involves actually restoring a relationship or working through the hurt with somebody else. Or if they're not if they're not accessible because maybe they've passed away, maybe they're no longer in the area, they can't be talked to, maybe they're not safe enough to talk to. You can work through, you can write letters, you can journal, have a conversation with your friend. So the first step is bringing it into light and actually being honest with yourself. Saying, I know that I've said I've forgiven them, but I don't feel like I've forgiven them. That's one of the first steps. And then ask the question, you can pray about this, talk about it with other people. What do I do about it? Do I need to just write a letter? Do I need to have a conversation with a friend? Do I need to see a counselor? And whatever you feel is the next step, go with that. Yeah.
That's good. A couple more.